This week's Parsha contains one of the most revolutionary ideas in the Torah. We all know the great turning points of Jewish history, the Exodus from Egypt and the revelation at Sinai. But hidden in this week's Parsha is another revolution that may be just as profound. The firstborn lose their privileged status. 3 times in the Torah, it says that Levites are taken instead of the firstborn. In a world where birth determined destiny, this was a radical idea. The Torah repeatedly challenges inherited privilege. Cain loses to Abel, Ishmael to Isaac, Esau to Jacob, Reuben to his younger brothers, and now the firstborn themselves lose their sacred role. What's even more remarkable is that this shift may have been so important that it reshaped the Exodus story itself. The plague of the firstborn becomes more than a story of liberation. It becomes a challenge to the very idea that holiness and authority are determined by birth. This week on Madlik, we explore the Torah's forgotten revolution, how Judaism began replacing inherited entitlement with responsibility, merit, and covenant. Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed a light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform, and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sefaria, and a link is included in the show notes. This week we read Bahalotcha, and we revisit a subject very close to my heart. So join us for Entitlement Reform Continued. We've done this before, Rabbi, but
we're have. It's a great topic.
We're here again. I really learned something, and when I said that it's almost on the equal footing of Sinai and Exodus, you're going to see why I was blown away. But let's dive right into it, because you're in London town. It's late at night there, and you're on your way to Georgia, of all places, and we're not talking about the state in the southern part of the United States either. So, here we go. We are in Numbers 8:1. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you mount the lamps, let the 7 lamps give light at the front of the lampstand." Now, this has nothing to do with the subject matter that we're going to talk about. But Rashi, quoting the Midrash, says something that I think gives us a context. And he says as follows: "When thou lightest the lamps," Rashi asks, "why is the section treating of the candelabra put in juxtaposition with the section dealing with the offerings of the princes?" He answers, "Because when Aaron saw the dedication offerings of the princes, he felt distressed, because neither he nor his tribe was with them in the dedication. Whereupon the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, by your life, b'chayai, your part is of greater importance than theirs, for you will kindle and set in the orders of the lamps." Rabbi, it was competitive, and we spent so many verses in last week's Parsha detailing each and every prince of each and every tribe that you shouldn't need a Rashi to tell you that the Levites felt left at the sidelines. But the reason I say it has context is because we are going to be talking about a transference from those leaders and those entitled people of power to the Levites. So the kind of juxtaposition and the interaction between the Levites, who were a stateless kind of tribe, and the other tribes has a bearing. What thinks you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this first Rashi kind of, raises a flag to say that all of these issues here are connected to one another, right? And, and the role of Levi and where it came from, that's really what all these Torah portions are about. Now, I think we're going to discuss today why, especially here, does the Torah bother to bring this up again? Like you said, this comes up a whole bunch of places. Why does it come up here specifically? But yeah, you're right. From the very first Rashi in the Parsha, you know that this is going to be the topic.
Okay, so now let's get to the meat of the matter. We are in Numbers 8:14, and it says, Thus you shall set the Levites apart from the Israelites, v'hivdalta et haLeviim betoch b'nei Yisrael. And the Levites shall be mine, v'ayehu li haLeviim. Thereafter, the Levites shall be qualified for the service of the tent of meeting once you have purified them and designated them as an elevation offering, for they are formally assigned to me from among the Israelites. He keeps on focusing on from among the Israelites. I have taken them, meaning the Levites, for myself in place of all the first issue of the womb, of all the male firstborn of the Israelites. Netunim hemali betoch b'nei Yisrael tachat pitrat kol rechem b'chol kol b'nei Yisrael lakachti otam li. So netunim is emphatic. I've taken them. And then it uses this word mitoch. There's kind of like a trade-off from out of the Bnei Yisrael. And then it does something that we're going to get into a little bit, is that Peter Rechem is that which opens up the womb, which Rabbi is from the maternal side. And Bechor is the firstborn you would normally think on the father's side. So we're combining a lot of ideas here. And then it says in verse 17, for every male firstborn among the Israelite, human as well as animal, is mine. Interesting. I consecrated them to myself at the time that I smote every male firstborn in the land of Egypt. Wow, we are going back to the Exodus. We're making a direct correlation to the plague, the last plague, where the firstborn of Egypt were killed. Now I take the Levites instead of every firstborn of the Israelites, and from among the Israelites I formally assign the Levites to Aaron and his sons to perform this service for the Israelites in the tent of meeting and to make expiation for the Israelites so that no plague may afflict the Israelites for coming too near the sanctuary. There's a lot of baggage here,
There's
Rabbi,
a lot of stuff there.
I had never really thought of the tie-in to the death of the firstborn and this concept of the firstborn, because it's not exactly something that is Jewish. In other words, in many cultures, there is this sense of the firstborn gets a larger portion. There's an entitled class, but that was the first thing that kind of struck me. And we're going to see that even this idea of firstborn human and animal somehow ties into the Exodus story. Just fascinating how it is trying to give legs to something that is occurring kind of in front of our eyes here as we speak in the book of Numbers.
Yeah, okay, very interesting. Let's go on. Let's see what we have.
Okay, so Rashi says, and I have given the Levites to do the service of the children of Israel, that there will be no plague among the children of Israel. The meaning is, I have given them, etc., so that it shall be unnecessary for them to come near the sanctuary, because, and this is the translator who puts it in, having sinned by worshiping the calf, if they come near, there will be a plague among them. So I don't know how much you feel the translator has legs to stand on, but certainly there is this tying it into the plague of the firstborn, but clearly also what happened at the sin of the golden calf was those that sinned, the earth opened up, there was a plague upon them, and the Levites were the ones who were pure, but also took Mila Hashem Elai, took the leadership role there. It does make you think, where do we know, in fact, why the firstborn lost the right and why the Levites had to serve instead of them?
Well, let's say the first thing. The story in Exodus chapter 32 that says that the Levites got up and they said, "Hu mil Hashem Elai," means they protected God, they protected Moshe. And the fact that the firstborn were included among the people who worship the golden calf, none of that, Jeffrey, is explicit. You can't know, right? You don't know that the firstborn worship the golden calf. All you know is that Torah doesn't distinguish between the firstborn and everybody else. Levi seems to be the good guy, but you don't actually know whether or not Levi participated in the worship of the golden calf. If anything, the one who was responsible for the golden calf was Aaron, and he was the Kohen Gadol. So he is the chief Levite. So this is, like we always like to say, this is reading history backwards. Because God chose the Levites over the firstborn, therefore we read back in that story of the golden calf that the firstborn were guilty and the Levites were innocent. I'm just pointing out here that the rabbinic read sometimes becomes what we like to call the pshat. Sometimes it becomes the literal read, even though the literal read doesn't actually say that. To say it another way, the way we always learned in yeshiva, and that is that Rashi's explanation isn't Rashi's explanation. Rashi's explanation, because Rashi is so famous, his explanation becomes the simple explanation of the Torah. And this is an example.
You took the words out of my mouth, because I think if most Jews were asked why the firstborn were passed over and the Levites got it, they would just say, as a matter of fact, it was because of the sin of the golden calf. And what we are learning, that not only in this Rashi is it in parentheses because it's only a translation, but it is totally rabbinic. And you can look at the story as you did, Adam, and say it's not altogether clear that that was the moment, because who says the Levi's hands were so clean? So now what I want to do is go to those verses that do connect to the firstborn, and that is something that I think most of us, including myself, really didn't focus on till now. And now, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing we value at Madlik Podcast, it's reading texts and talking about them. That's why I'm excited to share something I created called Voice Gift Play. It fits in the palm of your hand like a remote control and clips onto any book. It's inspired by those old school museum audio guides, but this is personal. Voice Gift Play stores up to 10 hours of audio across 999 numbered recordings. You simply enter a number to record a comment, memory, or explanation, and enter the same number to play it back. It's perfect for B'nai Mitzvah practicing their laning, capturing Grandpa's favorite tune, or recording Chad Gad Yar in a voice that matters. Go to voice.gift, that's www.voice.gift, and use code Madlik for 15% off. Thanks, and now back to our podcast. And now we go back to Exodus 12, and it says, Vayehi b'chatzi alayla. It was in the middle of the night. God struck down all the male firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. So the first surprising thing that all the commentaries have a challenge with is, why the cattle? Not only because there was a plague, a few plagues earlier where all the cattle were killed, but what does the cattle have to do with all of this? There were some commentaries that go so far as to say we're talking about domestic animals who were spared the other plague. It's a problem. So now we continue, but it does have this issue of the firstborn. So in Exodus 13:12, it says, now here is the halachic takeaway, you shall set apart for God every first issue of the womb. Every male firstling that your cattle drop shall be God's. But every firstling donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you shall break its neck. And you must redeem every male firstborn among your children. This stood by itself. In Devarim, it ends right here. But in Exodus, look what it ties it to. In verse 14, it says, and when in the time to come a child of yours asks you, saying, what does this mean? This comes right out of the Seder, but at the Seder, we don't replace firstborn. At the Seder, we're talking about matzah and Menorah. You shall reply to him, it was with a mighty hand that God brought us out of Egypt, the house of bondage. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, God slew every male firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of both human and animal. And here's the takeaway. Therefore, I sacrifice to God every first male issue of the womb, but redeem every male firstborn among my children. We should be having this discussion at the Seder if we are loyal to the question of this one of the four children. I had never really focused on this, Rabbi.
Fantastic. So, verse 14, which is, of course, taken from the Haggadah, this is the question of the third son, the simple son. When your son will ask you, what does this mean? You should say, with a mighty hand, God took us out of Egypt. It's not explicit. What does it mean? Mazot. What is that? What is that referring to? Now, your read of these verses is interesting because you're trying to read it to say, what is this all about? Meaning, why is it that the firstborn are separated to be special? What's that all about? And God answers, because I took you out of the land of Egypt, and therefore, and that was represented by the fact that the firstborn of the Egyptian were killed. So all of a sudden, this is a great read, Jeffrey. All of a sudden, the killing of the firstborn becomes front and center in the story of the Exodus. All of a sudden, the whole Exodus story is about the killing of the firstborn. Now, that is for sure not the way we learned it in yeshiva. It's not the way you say it at the Seder, but you're 100% right. These verses seem to suggest, Mazot, what is this about? The whole story revolves around this point.
It is literally nestled between verses 12 and 13, which talk about the redemption of the firstborn, and verse 15, which again gets back to the firstborn. It's hard not to read it as one piece. It is absolutely fascinating. So if we look at Numbers 3:12, and again, Rabbi, one thing we always know, that there are multiple ideas behind every rule, whether it's why is it called Beersheba, because there are 7 wells, or because we had an oath there. So there's different pathways. In Numbers 3:12, it says, I hereby take the Levites from among the Israelites in place of all the male firstborn, the first issue of the womb among the Israelites. The Levites shall be mine. For every such firstborn is mine. At the time that I smote every male firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated every firstborn in Israel, human and animal, to myself to be mine gods. So here, it already, whatever happened, Rabbi, that made the Levites take the baton from the firstborn, here it already packs it into 2 verses, and it rates it back all the way to the Exodus, like our other verses did, and it ties the knot to firstborn, gave it to the Levites, and here we are. Rashi says on Numbers 3:12, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel. This means whence do I claim the right on them among the children of Israel, that the Israelites should have to hire them for my service? It is through the firstborn, to whom I surely have a tithe, that I have a claim on them. He goes, for originally the service, the priestly functions, was performed by the firstborn. But when they, the Israelites among them, their firstborn too, sinned by the worshiping of the gold calf. So here it is not the translator, it's actually Rashi who says it. They became disqualified, and the Levites who had not worshipped the idol were chosen in their stead. And this comes from Zvachim. Again, it's rabbinic. Rashi is bringing this tradition that we feel almost is the Peshat, as you say. But in this Numbers 3, it all kind of gets mixed together. There is almost a direct line from what happened at the last plague to the Levites in our Parsha. And then something happens that I had never focused on before, Rabbi, and that I was blown away by. In last week's Parsha, in Numbers 3:39, it tells a story. And that's why I say this is on the same level as Exodus from Egypt or Sinai. It is a moment in our history. All the Levites who were recorded, whom at God's command Moses and Aaron recorded by their clans, all the males from the age of 1 month up came to 22,000. So, Rabbi, we've been spending a few weeks now counting each tribe by head counts, who's going to go into the military. Many times we say the Levites don't get counted, they don't serve. Here we count all the males from the age of 1 month up. They are 22,000. And then it says, and God said to Moses, record every firstborn male of the Israelites from the age of 1 month up and make a list of them. To make a long story short, all the firstborn males as listed by name recorded from the age of 1 month up came to 22,273. So we have Levites that come to 2,200, and we have the firstborn comes to 22,273. Rabbi, we got to we're trying to balance the books, and we're trying to reconcile our accounts, and we're off by 273. And as the redemption price of the 273 Israelites firstborn over and above the number of the Levite, take 5 shekels per head. So make a long story short, these psukim are crafting a scene, a powerful scene, where you're lining up, it's putting meat on this story. You're lining up all the Levites, and you're transferring power in this magical moment. And because we're not even talking about a myth, there are real numbers here. The numbers don't add up. Then we get into the 5 shekels per head. So I was so struck that they made a moment, just like the Exodus moment, and just like they made the Sinai moment, a moment for the transference away of primogeniture, of the value, the entitlement of the firstborn to the Levites. I had never focused on this before.
It's fantastic. Now, I want to tell you something amazing. You know, you get to 22,000, and then there are 273 extra. The way you get to 22,273 is actually a trick, because the other tribes are counted from the age of 20. The Levites are counted from the age of 1 month. So, first of all, it's interesting that their tribe is so much smaller than the other tribes. But it's almost, Jeffrey, as if the Torah is working backwards. It's almost as if the Torah needs to get to the number where the number of Levites and the number of firstborn is going to be the same. So they actually, play a little game with the math. And they say, well, when it comes to the Levites, if you count the Levites from 1 month old, then you'll get to 22,273. We only have to exchange 273. If we take them from 20 years old, we're going to have to exchange 10,000. We can't do that. So even there, you see, the Torah is very much interested in redeeming one for the next.
It could have easily been an origin story like George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. We didn't have to get into numbers. What the editor, what the writer of this text is trying to do is he's trying to make it real. He's trying to make you so that you could visualize this moment. And I took it this year. He's trying to emphasize the power of this moment. So there is an article in thetorah.com. It's called Laws of the Firstborn, How They Connected to the 10th Plague by a professor, Rabbi David Frankel. And what he tries to do is to show to what degree the writer of this story, God, Moses, editors later, it doesn't really matter to us. What matters is that what the writers are trying to do is to show how powerful this moment was. He makes an argument. There was no reason to have the firstborn animals die in the last plague. The reason they brought that in was because there was a pre-existing tradition and law about giving the firstborn animal. We've seen that already. And he wanted to connect it. They wanted to connect it to the powerful Exodus story, and they wanted to connect it to the firstborn of humans as well. And so what they did is, we would call it a mashup now. They mashed up these varying traditions to give this power. He says it is clear that this combined complex of firstborn laws was of great importance to the later editors of the Pentateuch. This is evident from the brief law collection in Exodus. And here he brings even one more mashup of verses. In Exodus 34, it says, "You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I have commanded you at the set time of the month of Aviv. For in the month of Aviv you went forth from Egypt. Every first issue of the womb is mine. From all your livestock that drop male as firstlings, whether cattle or sheep. But the firstling of a donkey you shall redeem. You must redeem every male firstborn among the inhabitants. None shall appear before me empty-handed." So he even brings it to the annual sacrifice that you bring in the pilgrimage festival. They wove this concept of the firstborn. Rabbi, I don't know what I've been reading. I've been missing this. There is, at so many levels, it is trying to bring in this issue of the firstborn into the Exodus story, that you cannot ignore it. I'll say something else that he said. When the firstborn at the Seder, or about the Seder, asks it, it's because he really felt that this was annualized. In this verse in Shemot, you get it as part of the pilgrimage festival, that we are annualizing this concept of the firstborn. We think of it when your child is born, 30 days later, there's a Pidyon Haben. What this is trying to do is to keep that story, that narrative, and the message behind it, which we'll get into next, in front of us at all times.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. So what I think another piece of this is that you see another example of the tragedy of the golden calf, because the golden calf created a rupture in the way it was supposed to be. The story of the Exodus is the story of the firstborn, of the choosing of the firstborn of the Israelites. But because of the golden calf, the firstborn lost their right. That actually is a bigger deal than we were ever willing to make of it.
So what you're saying is part and parcel of, I would say, celebrating the firstborn is also acknowledging what was lost when we gave up the firstborn.
Correct.
So he says, to explain how two ritual practices simultaneously symbolize a single event, the editor of the law of Exodus simultaneously added the death of the firstling animals to the plague of the firstborns. Not only the Egyptians' firstborns destroyed, but so also their firstlings. The point that he makes over and over again, and he doesn't really have a takeaway, is that the Torah is intent on combining all of these messages. I would say that what the real takeaway is that this becomes a story about breaking the ideology of the birthright. Because if you think about the most basic message of Pharaoh, is from Pharaoh to anybody and who was in charge in the prisons, whatever, this is breaking down primogeniture, breaking down, as I say, entitlement, and this is, I think, why this becomes so important. The Torah systematically dismantles the hierarchical assumptions of the ancient Near East. Human dignity is not determined by birth. And that really comes through to me, Rabbi, when we think of what we've been reading in Numbers about all these heads of the tribes, all these Nisim, all of these famous people, and then woof, it gets translated to the land, translated transferred to the landless Levites. And I think ultimately what happens, and we've come across this. We came across this in Joshua Berman, who in his book, Created Equal, How the Bible Broke with Ancient Political Thought, that everything that we read about the revolution leads us to believe that we're breaking down these hierarchies. We saw it recently in Daniel Elazar, and when we talked about federalism, the firstborn lose the priesthood, and eventually the rabbis declare that a Torah scholar takes precedence over an ignorant high priest. So ultimately, where this all goes, Rabbi, is where we get to the rabbis. And the rabbis say, even the Levites who had the temple, but the temple was destroyed. So maybe they had the menorah and the light. We have midrashim that talk about that in this week's parsha. But ultimately, what the rabbis did was the rabbi said in the Mishnah in Horiot that a priest precedes a Levite precedes an Israelite. We're ready for a Mishnah that talks about the hierarchy. And then it says, after all of the hierarchies, and a convert goes in front of an emancipated slave, it gets to the very bottom. And it says, when do these halakhic or precedents take effect of hierarchy? In circumstances when they are all equal in terms of wisdom. But if there was a mamzer who is a Torah scholar and a high priest who is an Amoritz, an ignoramus, a mamzer takes first place. So my argument today, Rabbi, is one of the reasons why this, I would say, segue and this evolution from the exodus from Egypt and bringing down the Pharaoh and giving it to the firstborn and bringing one's the best for God and that whole tradition, and then moving it to the Levites because we've fallen short, and then the temple being destroyed, and there's no more temple for the Levites, all led to a wonderful, I would guess, evolution in Judaism that broke down all of the hierarchies in favor of learning and real authority, which is character. There's a beautiful thing in our vote. Rabbi Shimon said there are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, the crown of royalty, but the crown of a good name supersedes them all. It's just, I think, a wonderful story, but it's not so much a drush when you look at the actual narrative that we saw for the first time today through fresh eyes and the actual recasting of the whole Exodus.
Amazing. This is really, really good. And, again, we're reading these stories that we read every single year, but we have a new twist on them this time. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy Parshat Beha'alotcha. We look forward to seeing you next week. Shabbat Shalom from Georgia, the other Georgia. Shabbat Shalom.
We can't wait. We can't wait to hear all about it as you in the book of Numbers as we travel. So Shabbat Shalom, and we will see you all next week.